This is an image of the late, great Tom Stillday, who was super entertaining to hang out with. He was from the community of Panema on the Red Lake Reservation in northwestern Minnesota. For those who haven't been there, there are probably about 1,000 people in the village. No one's ever been baptized. 100% traditional Ojibwe religious belief and funeral practice. Among other things, people bury their dead in the front yard. And they have spirit houses where everyone's buried. So you step out the door to your house, and there's mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, generation upon generation, older than America. Makes it a little harder to sell the family farm and move to California. In some ways, this is something that is a little different about the indigenous communities. There's a sense of community in many places and in many ways. Even when we move to a new place, we can form community even around a sport team or something like that. I think across America, we put a lot of emphasis on financial attainment. So if you get a job, and the job's in California, spread your wings and fly, move to California, become Californian. And part of the American experience is having a malleable identity. It can change. Part of the indigenous experience is it's a lot harder to be a Red Laker if you have no connection to Red Lake. Even those who move to the Twin Cities or somewhere else are often going back for a powwow, for funerals, and trying to maintain connection to that place of origin. Indigenous means of the land. And so there's always a tension about this. In some ways, it's kind of like, like a wedding ring is a tether. It will limit you in certain ways. But that tether is also liberating and freeing and opens up new, wonderful, beautiful things through the deeper connection. It's like that for Native people and the connection to community. In some ways, it's harder to just move to California and become Californian. You're sacrificing something big to do that. But there's also this beauty of being connected to something even older than America and the same places, customs, traditions, even though those things are under stress in a whole variety of ways. So Tom was fun. He was the first person named chaplain for the Minnesota State Senate who was not from a religion that came from across the ocean. That says something, too, about the American experience. So he was fun. That was him with his pipe opening up the Senate. And he'd say, "I'm praying for politicians. Boy, do they need it." And that was even before the things we've seen in the most recent chapters in American politics. And we also had him at our university to give a graduation banquet speech, which I fondly remember, because I'd been, kind of pressuring them to bring him in. And finally they did. Jerome was there for these kind of events too, because he went through Bemidji State. I finally convinced them to bring him in. I said, he's got a PhD in the School of Life. He'll have a lot of great things to say. And they brought him in. And I talked to Tom on the side, who is so notoriously long-winded. I said, "Have you ever seen a TED Talk?" He's like, "Nope." I'm like, "Well, they're about 12 to 15 minutes. That's what you got, because we have a lot of clapping to do, a lot of awards to hand out." He says, "Okay, got it." Got up there, he spoke for an hour and a half straight. He did it all in Ojibwe. And we're in mixed company, so I'm watching the president and deans, and they're glazing over. And finally, when he was done, he said one thing in English. He said, "All you people who study Indians, study that." And he went and sat down. So I thought he was awesome. But he had good points. Most of the books written about Native people were written by non-Native people who hadn't even talked to one. That's not going to tell you about Native people. That's kind of like the history books like that it might be historically significant what the Army officer wrote in his journal at Fort Ripley, in 1862. But that's a history of white folk when they were encountering natives, not a history of natives or what Native people were thinking and doing and believing and their culture and things like that. It's not just the history books. It's also the economic development plan, the school turnaround plan, the substance abuse intervention plan, all the things. If you're missing Native perspectives and we're expecting the same results out of the plan or the initiative or fundraising effort or whatever, and then we're kind of shocked, like, how come it's not working for everybody else? And I think that's actually one of the issues with navigating all the different kinds of diversity. We don't all fit into the cookie cutter as humans. We're finding this out in education. Some people are wired for different kinds of learning. They're different kinds of intelligence. And that we need to be adaptable so we can meet, for example, kids where they're at and take them on an educational journey, instead of just forcing them to do it a certain way, which works for some but not all.